Howdy. Thanks for listening to Let the Movie Speak. Before we get started, we'd like to ask a favor of you.
It's a simple favor. If you could just rate and review our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you listen, that might help other ears get into our ecosystem here and hear another episode. Anyway, enjoy the show.
If I knew, I'd tell you. I don't know anything about it. Ask the police.
That'd be very smart. That'd be about the smartest thing I ever did. Me, that a police captain's been in the hospital 3 weeks on account of we had an argument. The boys would like to have me come in and ask questions. They'd like it right down to the end of their blackjacks. Now, I comes to you on a level. Studsy says you're on the level. Why don't you be on the level?
I am on the level. If I knew anything, I'd be...
What's that?
I don't know. That makes this your party.
Open up, police!
Why, you two-timing?
John Dillinger was shot to death, leaving a showing of Manhattan melodrama. And rumor was he had gone to the film to see his favorite actress, Myrna Loy. Given her relative anonymity at the time, the rumor is suspect, but it does speak to Loy's meteoric rise to fame in 1934, mostly due to her role as Nora Charles. Eventually, Loy and her co-star William Powell would be paired as Nick and Nora 5 more times. If you've ever known a story where the sharp detective unravels a whodunit over shrimp and champagne, you know Nick Charles. You know the Thin Man.
Let the movie speak.
All right, everybody. Well, welcome back to our 5th and midway episode of Let the Movie Speak. How's it going, Justin?
Oh, man, it's really good, especially after that intro. I realized last week, do you remember we mentioned a lobotomy, and then we never really followed up. You never? Oh, 3 weeks ago. Okay, I'm sorry. They all run together.
Blend together
when we've done hundreds of episodes like we have.
Thousands. Yes.
I thought after reflecting on that, we probably should have maybe brought that back full circle or something. So to the editors and to the the team of writers that we employ to do this, I just want to say well done.
Yeah.
And congratulations, and happy to be here.
We'll let them know what you thought.
Okay, good. Thank you.
We're lucky enough to have a guest this week, which we've had a guest. This is our second time, and it was super fun and informative, and just brought great perspective to the conversation last time. This time we have a colleague of mine who I'm lucky enough to work with. And would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Annie, and as you say, we work together. And I think you have invited me into this conversation because the movie of the hour is one of my favorite movies from childhood. So I am excited to talk about it today.
Sweet. Yes, and we're excited to have you. We always start off by giving you a window into our watching habits with a little section called What Did We Watch This Week? Justin, we'll give you the first dibs on this one. What did you watch this week?
Well, I'm gonna kind of, like a good partner on any kind of endeavor. I'm not gonna help you bear the weight like the fellow oxen. I'm just gonna drag you down in the mud like a block of cement. But I'm going to use the excuse of saying that I have intel that you have finished the second season of The Mandalorian, and because we have not talked about that enough, I thought we should have that out here for a couple minutes.
Yes, that's true. That I wasn't going to bring that up even, but I'm glad that you did. I finished the second season of The Mandalorian. That's true.
It is true.
So before I tell you what I thought, what did you think? Because you've obviously finished it with your family, right?
Yes, yeah, we have. I've seen it multiple times, I think, for better and for worse. It does, I think this show as a whole continues to get some of the little details right from the Star Wars universe, especially as it comes to character design and just the aesthetic. At times feels very, very original trilogy or just post-original trilogy kind of aesthetic in a very positive way. I enjoy seeing some of these prosthetic creatures and creations, whether it's Queel the Ugnaught from the first season or the Frog Lady from the second season. That stuff is really goofy, but in a very Star Wars appropriate way. But unfortunately, it falls prey, I think, to the worst tendencies of this franchise. I think the CGI of the Dark Troopers is the most glaring kind of. I think we both agreed they look like Zurg from Toy Story.
Yeah, they totally do. The eyes are the exact same shape.
Yeah, and they're not fun to look at. They don't say anything. They just punch really hard, apparently. So that kind of, on one hand you have great creature design, and on the other hand you have horrible droid CGI.
Yes.
And with a few exceptions, a few rays of hope, the narrative, I would say, overall is not. It doesn't really exist. It's very much like playing a video game this season.
It's exactly like that, right? Like we're old people compared to the like bread and butter of what they're, I guess, shooting for, I think, demographic wise. But I don't play video games, but I know enough about them to know that like each section of them is like it's like a fetch quest thing, right? Like you gotta meet the guy to get the thing or kill the dude or whatever. And it's like and like you said, like there's a valid historical like consistency for like a serialized thing, right? Like old radio dramas with the Lone Ranger and the Shadow and like all those, and Gunsmoke and whatever. Like the show purports to be kind of a Western. So there's some precedent for that, but maybe it's just a preference thing for the both of us, but I don't love that. Like just because that's a thing that existed historically, like you said, it feels like we can move past the idea that it's like, well, just tune in next week to see who blasts who in the head, you know, like that's only so exciting for so long. But the moments in this second season that they get right are I think reasonably few and far between. Like you want to connect the large overarching story. It's like we talked about, it's 8 episodes. They all should be fantastic, right? Like you're going to do an 8-episode season. Absolutely. They should all be like kind of perfect. You could probably cut like 2 whole episodes out of this season and still tell all of the same story, which it's just a lot of set piece driven technology, like which person in Mandalorian armor can have the coolest jetpack, grappling hook, whatever. Yeah. So overall, I think we have the same kind of takeaway. It's enjoyable to watch, but I don't find, just like the first season, I don't find that it's like, I don't need to go back and rewatch it right away.
Right. And we've both discussed this before, especially with Rogue One, but it is really frustrating to see the glorification of the CGI technology to supposedly de-age some of these actors. In this case, Mark Hamill.
That's the worst thing I've ever seen. It's so bad.
It's not. It doesn't look good now.
No.
And so I don't know what we're going to think about it in 10 years. But it just seems like such an easy missed opportunity for so many other techniques you could have done to shoot that and make it
like
more
casting.
Meaningful.
Like cast someone who looks
just cast
kind
someone
of like
that
Mark
looks
Hamill.
Like, yeah, or do some kind of lighting, put him in the shadows.
Yeah.
Do something, but just staring, not just like a blink and you miss it kind of a thing, but just have to do a kind of a medium shot of sort of Mark Hamill with Play-Doh CGI face. It's not a good look. And really robbed an already not very climactic climax of meaning. So
doesn't that feel like we're going to literally put Andy to sleep if we talk about Star Wars for too much longer? But I have one more question for you.
Okay.
So there's like The Last Jedi, and people like either hate it or they loved it. Most of that centered around, do you like what they did to the character of Luke Skywalker, or do you hate the idea that he's like a reclusive, sort of Jedi Order denying? Like he says in a lot of ways that like what the original trilogy established, he's like, it's bad almost,
Right.
And I know you're almost, I don't know if you wouldn't put yourself in the neck beardy, like annoying guy on Twitter, like I'm going to call you a moron if you like the movie category. But I would say like by and large, that wouldn't be how you like took that story as a screenwriter or something like that. I fall into the other camp. I love that angle. This really feels like, okay, guys, if you didn't like that, we're going to fix it all in one sequence. You know what I mean? We're going to give you that moment you wanted with Luke with the green lightsaber, and he's going to come in and he's going to be the Luke you remember. And I'm like, even if you are that person, this is somebody standing there with essentially a rubber mask on. Like if you want that moment, it's not there for you. So yeah, like you said, I think off mic at one point, I'm glad they did something with with the character of the child, because that was becoming very gimmicky and a thing to sell toys, which is, it's Star Wars. What are you going to do? But yeah, I would say I'm averaging out both seasons to like a meh at this point. As a pretty ecstatic Star Wars fan, I don't find myself wanting to go back and rewatch them. We always like to circle the wagons here. So, Annie, what did you watch this week? Give people an insight into your habits.
Well, I am not what I would necessarily call a film buff, although there are certain films I love. But I did end up watching Baz Luhrmann's Gatsby this week. And, I had seen Baz Luhrmann's earlier films, so I was pretty familiar with his aesthetic. And but what I do know is books and literature. That is my focus. And so I went into this film having read the book recently, and I think that Luhrmann is the perfect director for this content, in that he is probably the only director I can think of who could capture the opulence and the over the top.
He's the Romeo and Juliet with guns.
Yeah.
Guy,
Romeo
right?
and Juliet with guns, Moulin Rouge with the elephant.
Yeah, that's right.
Right, like he does all that. And so he's perfect for the extravagance that is Gatsby. And so I fully support the choice of him making this film. However,
there it is.
And you knew it was coming. I think the story of Gatsby is about the glitz that's covering the rot. And it's about the rot and the death and the maggots underneath all of the pretty. And I don't think Luhrmann can bring himself to get there.
Yeah.
Like, I think he's so committed to pretty that he just can't get to what Fitzgerald was actually trying to communicate.
Yeah.
And so I think that's most clearly seen with the casting of the Wilsons. Myrtle Wilson is not supposed to be an attractive person, and it's Isla Fisher.
Yeah.
And it's like, her clothes are gaudy, but she's pretty. And so I really enjoyed it. I think I actually am not mad about it.
Yeah.
I'm not a
but like,
what's his face name? But I don't love the lead.
Leo?
No, the other lead. Tobey Maguire.
Tobey Maguire, yeah.
I don't love him.
Yeah.
I don't love that casting either.
Yeah.
I'm not mad about it. It was good. I'll probably use clips of it when I need to teach the novel. But
do you like his Romeo and Juliet?
Yeah, for the most part, I do.
So you think that's a more like successful adaptation than the Gatsby?
To be fair, I haven't seen it in
a long time.
In a long time. Notably, also Leo.
Yeah.
But
that's true.
So I think that probably worked better because you can't tell Romeo and Juliet without the whole dying at the end.
Totally.
Whereas...
And that one is so much more like you take Shakespeare and add guns. It's not like he basically did Gatsby as the period piece, but just his over-stylized aesthetic on top of it. It wasn't like a total transfer like you've seen a lot of Shakespeare adaptations on stage where they totally modernize it or make it all spacey and futuristic or whatever. I think there's something incongruous about his understanding of like the story and character, and like, I know how to make that pretty or make that look like it's supposed to look. He gets the look like interestingly right in the movie, I think too.
Yeah. So that was my film of the week, and totally entertaining, but I think Fitzgerald was saying a little bit more than Luhrmann was.
Wonderful. All right. The last thing I was going to bring up is that this is the transition piece right here. This is the segue coming up, people. We always like to tell people when we're going to segue because then they know we're professionals. I watched When Harry Met Sally with my wife Morgan for the first time, which was super enjoyable and really fun. And it leads perfectly into what we're going to talk about today, which is romantic comedy of sorts, let's say. Justin, what did you think of The Thin Man on first viewing?
It was really entertaining. I say that because not all of the movies we've watched so far in the season have been. But I think it succeeded on the most important metric by which movies are judged. If you're going to write a fictitious script, your audience had better be with you to hang. And I certainly was hanging around like a monkey in the jungle.
Okay. Was this the first time you'd seen it?
It was.
Okay, great. I'm in the same boat. First time I've seen it. I've talked to Annie about it more times than I've ever watched it. And then Annie, obviously, this is not the first time you've seen the movie.
No, it is not the first time I've seen the movie. I can't tell you how many times. However, it is probably only the second time I've seen the first 15 minutes.
Okay, that's an interesting note.
Yes, which is probably something we'll get back to later.
Yes, we will circle back to that. So basically what we have here is a novel by Dashiell Hammett in 1934. A movie came out the same year, which I guess they were faster back then. And this is my first time, Justin's first time, Annie's umpteenth time. We have a few bigger names in Hollywood on the docket, where William Powell's a big name as Nick Charles. We kind of hinted at it in the intro, but Myrna Loy, this is kind of her big break in a lot of ways. It being a popular book made, I'm sure, the ticket sales and the draw and the appeal kind of what it was, but William Powell was the face on the poster, if there was one. W.S. Van Dyke was a pretty established director at that point too. But other than that, background information that you think might be interesting to share, Annie, before we get started, other than what we have there? Oh, the screenplay was written by a married couple, which is interesting. So the adaptation was done by a married couple. I'm sure because the two lead characters are charismatic, we could give them a little credit for that.
Yeah, I just think that Dashiell Hammett was probably a selling point too.
Yeah.
As you know, his books he was already a well-known famous author and writer. So yeah.
Him, not to mention, this will come up, but Prohibition ended the year before this movie came out. Mm-hmm. If you didn't figure that out by watching it, it's there. So let's get into the bulk of the conversation here and figure out what the movie is saying. How's that sound, Justin?
Great.
All right, this is where we talk about how was the movie? Was it good? Was it bad? What do we think about what it's saying? How are the actors? All the big stuff. So I won't bury the lead at the front here, but just like Justin said, super enjoyable movie, mostly due to the charisma and interaction between the two leads at the top of the billing. I really thought, watching these movies from the 30s, one thing that I keep thinking of is like, I've seen that before. Because I'm not like a film historian. I'm not like a super duper film buff, film student person. But I've watched more movies than the average person. So I'm watching M, and I'm watching 42nd Street and Frankenstein and It Happened One Night and Now The Thin Man. And there's something in every one of these movies that's been taken a million times and used over and over and over again. And the two things that popped out at me were the absolute reliance on, if Nick and Nora are funny in this scene, it's going to make it in the movie. If William Powell and Myrna Loy are clicking, it's going to make Final Cut. They are the heart and center of what makes this movie enjoyable to watch. And the editing really, like, it doesn't just look like good. It makes punchlines for the movie a lot of times. There's several sequences where when they're trying to drive a plot point home, the editing is so quick. It's like one piece of dialogue cut, one piece of dialogue wipe, one piece of dialogue. It seems like it's probably integral to the screenplay, I would guess, but just really well done. What was your initial takeaway of the overall quality of the movie, Justin?
Yeah, exactly. Kind of mirroring your thoughts. Unfortunately for our listeners, it's very, very similar in my opinion world. I found it kind of reminiscent, some of those bigger, in terms of how many cast members are involved, the bigger scenes, like the first dinner party that the Charleses are hosting. That is very reminiscent in a backwards way, because obviously this came after this movie, but it's very reminiscent of the kind of comedy and the way of presenting characters as found in more modern comedies like Arrested Development. Mm-hmm. And the amount of dialogue that is thrown at the viewers is pretty incredible. I read later that in that final scene where William Powell's character is trying to give his kind of thoughts at the dinner table about who done it, Powell actually complained to the director, like, I have so many lines to learn here, I have no idea even what I'm saying. Why are, And if this movie has a fault, it's the small one of almost overloading the audience with too much dialogue. I mean, there's so much there. on one hand, that's great because nowadays we can go back and rewatch and replay, quickly. But I could see that as maybe slightly perturbing in the theater.
Yeah.
Because it's rapid fire. It doesn't stop until the movie's over.
Totally. That's a good note on tone. Like the pacing is super fast. It's snappy and funny. I think the tone is affected by the way the movie is set up and the way the introduction, the movie starts. So why don't you complete your hinted at anecdote there?
All right. So, my history goes way back to this. I watched this for the first time as a 7 or 8 year old. So, I can never fully watch this as an adult. Like there's the child in me comes out every time.
The way we were like nerding out about Star Wars.
Yes. Yeah.
This is
Yeah. So at some point in the 80s, there was a 5 nights of Nick and Nora, and my mom recorded them all. 5 of the 6. And there's a reason they did 5 of the 6. But 6th is not good, just to make the subtext text. But when she did that, she missed the first about 15 minutes of the first one. And so I grew up watching this, when I was homesick or on rainy Sunday afternoons. And I always watched it with the first scene being in the bar where Nick is drinking martinis and Nora comes in with Asta and all the Christmas presents and she does a pratfall. And for me, that was the beginning of the film. And by the way, I was 7 and I still followed it. Like, you really don't need the whole opening scenes where with Wynant and Julia Wolf, like, I grew up watching this movie and I never saw them alive.
Yeah.
And it still worked. And I think the tone works better because you don't start with all of this like very serious classic noir
exposition
because you don't, and you start with the joke.
Yeah.
And then that carries the whole film. So that
it's like they repeat all that stuff later anyway.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm figuring if I, as a 7 or 8 year old, if I could follow the plot without that exposition dump, I think everybody could. And
so you saw the unauthorized, edited by your mother cut
unintentionally.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so
I think it helped the tone.
Yeah, I can imagine as someone who entered into the whole series of films that early, that might hold your interest a little more, because the first 15 minutes is really just like, well, I'm going here, I can't tell you where, and the money's here, and the bonds, and it's a lot of that kind of stuff, which again they do repeat it later. Let's talk about some sort of ancillary characters, because we're gonna, I'm sure Nick and Nora will keep coming up. They're the whole center of most of these scenes. But I will say, from my perspective, really good supporting characters and supporting cast. Specifically the names, right? If you want to talk about like noir tropes and just like, I don't know, 30s gangster stuff. This isn't even really gangster stuff, capital G, but there's some of that, right? You have like Nunheim and Studsy and Morelli, and I don't know, like these guys literally have one name on the cast list. And I think that is fun and kind of kitschy, but also everybody does a really good job when they're given more to do than just be the like, see kind of a character. Justin, did you have any like secondary characters that stuck out to you?
Yeah, the guy that's crying for his mother at the dinner party. He's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
No, it's another movie, kind of like
It Happened One Night.
Thank you. It Happened One Night. The secondary characters are not here just to be like, "Hey, Mister, I saw him go that way," and then it's over. They really have put some thought into not just writing these characters, but in casting them and directing them in such a way that everyone is really enjoyable to watch. And to the point about that Annie made about the first 15 minutes, while I do see the tone disparity there, for some of those secondary characters, it's really interesting to see, at least to me, how they kind of change throughout the movie. So you have Dorothy in the beginning, who seems, very, very, I guess throughout the movie, she just presents herself as different degrees and different versions of being immature. But in the beginning, she's very bubbly, and I guess by the end she is too. But she starts off at a very sane, if not very juvenile kind of frame of mind, and then she takes a hard left for for despair as the movie continues. And this is kind of circling back a little bit. I don't want to get us too off track, but if you get rid of the first 15 minutes, you get rid of one of my favorite scenes or shots from this movie, which is where the titular thin man, not Mr. Powell, but Father, what's his name?
Claude Winan.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. So he walks out of the apartment, and there's that shot of him walking on the street, and it fades to black. And you know just by watching that shot, you will never see that guy again.
Yeah.
He's dead.
It's good film language there, yeah.
Yeah, the way that that's communicated is just really astounding to me.
Yeah.
Really powerful.
Agreed. I think we could make the argument, right, that like from a story perspective, or if you needed to cut down time, the movie functions and probably succeeds very, very well. But that's a nice moment. You're right. And there's a lot of, we've watched so far, 5 films, varying degrees of like finesse. Filmmaking wise, this one has quite a bit of it compared to, I don't know, Justin Frankenstein, which was super underwhelming in that regard.
Maybe.
Yeah. So Annie, talk to us about secondary characters and how they work in the story. What do you like? What do you?
All right. Well, I think there's 2 that pop out as my favorites. One for pure comedy is Brother Gilbert, who I'm trying not to laugh really hard into this mic for the sake of
the one who
everyone's
studies serial
ears.
killers.
The one who studies serial killers
yeah.
and is just always in other people's personal space.
Yes.
And he's always just staring at people. Like, I think this may be like going back to the idea of, what's it called? Phrenology, where you can judge someone's like criminal intent or
by staring into their eyes.
by how their face is or how their skull is made up. And so he just has been making me laugh my whole life and continues to. The other character I really like, probably on a little deeper level, is John Guild, who's the detective.
Yeah.
And I think what I like, well, first off, I just like the actor and how he inhabits the role. But even more than that, I really value that this story treats him with respect. Like, he can't be the hero. He can't be the one who figures it out because that's Nick's job. But he isn't an idiot.
Right.
And he isn't corrupt. Like, he is a good detective doing his work well with integrity. He's willing to partner with Nick as much as he can.
Yeah.
And he's just a good man doing good work. And he does show up in future films.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
So whenever they're in New York, he shows some of the films are, take place in San Francisco or other places, but for the films that take place in New York, he's in them.
That's
and
awesome.
So I really value that they treat him with respect.
Does that strike you as interesting, Justin? Well, you mentioned M earlier, right? And if we go from M to this, 2 wildly different tones of movies, but procedural, right? Both approaching procedure and crime investigation, but M basically says about most institutions, whether it's police or media or the criminal underworld, like these are all corrupt and to some degree inept. Right. And then in this case, I think Annie has a really good point. I thought I gravitated towards that character as well because he's very sympathetic. He's not like the cop who's in the way. He's not like the cop who's constantly getting everything wrong because he's bad at his job. He's kind of making normal, logical police moves.
Yeah, and I think time frame probably has a lot to do with that too, right? We mentioned John Dillinger in our intro. So Prohibition had just ended, and so cops are no longer the people that are going to bust down Grandpa Stan's homemade brewery to get the moonshine. We have this kind of moral panic about Bonnie and Clyde and Don Dillinger and Babyface Nelson and all these characters, and it's on all the front pages that the FBI and this and that PD and sheriff's office are in gun battles with them. So I think the public wants to turn to law enforcement as their hope and their salvation against these bad characters. And so it seems very logical to me for the time period that it would be a very pro-law enforcement film. And while I would agree that he is very almost exclusively portrayed as smart and like Annie said, performing his job with integrity and diligence, I do take umbrage with the scene where they're in what's that guy's name, Nunheim?
Yeah.
Okay, when they're in his house, and then he's like, okay, I'll tell you where I was, and then he just goes and closes the door, and they just let him do that. I don't know. As someone that's had, a little bit of knowledge and working with law enforcement, it just it was, it's one of those hurdles where you can't get over. If you're in someone's house and they're a suspect in something, you don't just like let them go do their own thing behind a locked door. But I'm willing to let that slide. Of course, it's not a make it or break it thing. But
Suspend your
interesting
disbelief,
point
yes.
where otherwise a very competent person does something very incompetent.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. See, I would have never picked up on that because
No.
I'm just like a teacher.
No, I noticed it too, but it's so clearly for the point of the plot.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
yes, his character does suffer
Sure.
in order that the plot moves forward.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think the main character, let's call him the starring character in this movie is the script in my mind because
The dog is the starring
Okay,
character.
the dog. The dog, which apparently they used multiple dogs. They weren't allowed to be friends with the dog because the trainers didn't want the dog to get distracted. So the dog actually bit William Powell at one point. And there's some great nonsense behind the scenes stories there. But I think, it's the dialogue and the delivery between William Powell and Myrna Loy. It's what makes it fun and funny and fresh. And in a lot of ways, like you pulled Arrested Development as a reference. I wrote down a lot of these things that I'm like, without this movie, we may not have this. Without this movie, we may not have this. I wasn't even thinking in terms of like sitcom dialogue, rhythm, and all. Certainly, I think there's some of that in here too. We said the same thing about It Happened One Night. And I wrote down a few of these lines, which just killed me because, I've read enough scripts, whether they're stage or screenplays or whatever, to know when a line is funny on the page and it'll also be funny elsewhere. I have... what's that man doing in my drawers? There's just like simple wordplay and there's a spit take right after that. It's not like super highbrow, but it's just so cleanly done. He didn't come anywhere near my tabloids.
My favorite line of the entire film.
It's so good. Yeah, because it's a quick exchange. It's like, well, you got shot this many times in this paper and 5 times in the tabloids. He didn't come anywhere near my tabloids. It's like just edgy enough, So, Justin, were there any of those lines that stuck out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. It turns out he had a secretary, and to which the fiance replies, "I'll do my own typing."
Yes. Yeah, that's so good.
I mean, the tabloid line is my favorite.
Yeah.
And they sell that dialogue. The two leads sell that dialogue so effortlessly. There is so. The charisma just leaps off of the screen. It's really, and I think remarkable kind of for the time too, where let's contrast that again with It Happened One Night, where, it's more a tale of Clark Gable's character kind of, taking the female lead and kind of molding her to be like, this is how you're going to be wise, honey. Come down off your high horse. And in this, they're very much equals. And there's no... It's really fascinating to me how much joy seems to be represented in their marriage. They're not in the doldrums of like, oh, great, here we go again. See you later, honey, whatever you say. They really feed off of each other. They're both energized by each other. They're both in love with each other. And they're both kind of on life's adventure.
Yeah.
And that's really something that's not often portrayed in movies regardless of time period.
There's a quote from a guy who wrote about, genres evolving, Andrew Saris, and he said something super similar to what you just said. He said, Nick and Nora were the first on-screen couple for whom marriage did not signal the end of sex, romance, and adventure. And that's captured so well. I'm sure you have plenty to say about Nick and Nora.
Well, I mean, I think Nick and Nora is why I watched this movie over and over and over again. And I absolutely agree with that quote. I think the other layer of it is the trust. And I think that's what drew me to it, is that when she comes into the bedroom and he has Dorothy in his arms,
That's such a good moment.
And like all she does is scrunch her face at him. Like all they do is make faces at each other. Like there's no stress, there's no worry, there's no
Extra
jealousy,
melodrama. Like
No.
what's going on? You don't need it.
They're just so confident in their relationship and in who each other are and in letting each other be themselves. I mean, how many jokes are there about how he's living off her money?
Yeah.
Right? But there's no shame in it
or bitterness.
Yeah. It's just yeah, she's rich and now I don't have to work.
And sometimes that's said like that's a great like joke that's verbal and said a bunch of times, and she jabs him with it, and it's not out of like bitterness, it's out of like love. But then it's also just shown, like the sequence where he's laying on the couch and just shooting balloons with the BB gun or whatever. Apparently that came out of just him messing around on set. Like he was just like, he found the prop and he was shooting ornaments or something. And they were like, let's try that out. I also read, if we want to talk about William Powell, center on him for a second, that the your first sequence of the movie, our first introduction to him in the bar where he's, you know, this is how you shake a drink. You know, you got to have rhythm. You do this kind of a drink to a samba rhythm or whatever it is. Right. It's really good. All ad-libbed because the director basically just said, like, I want you to go over there. I'm going to check the lighting and I want you to just lighting and sound. So just go start and do your thing and just be really loose and whatever. And then they just said, cut, next scene. And he was like, we already did it, you know? And that was the beginning of like, if you're on like that, we're going to be fine, you know? So there's a director-actor thing going on here too that's really, really, I don't know, fluid and alive.
Well, and this wasn't the first movie that they had worked on together. I think Van Dyke had worked with both Myrna Loy and William Powell in the past, and it shows because there's a trust.
It's that one. It's the one from the thing, isn't it?
The Manhattan melodrama.
Yeah, that's the one
from the intro.
And Clark Gable. See, it's like we planned all of this. Everybody.
It's all coming full circle.
It's like we know what we're talking about.
It's almost like we know what we're talking about. Okay, we're getting to the point where I'm going to move us into what's the movie saying. I don't think there's a lot here that doesn't work for me. I love every scene of this movie. It clips right by. But it's a harder movie, Justin, wouldn't you say, to ask this question for? Because in some ways, something that's not purely dramatic, you got to dig a little deeper at times.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And if I can offer my one criticism of this movie, it's really inconsequential. Because again, it sounds like we all agree this is an incredibly fun movie. It's fast. It's not really, because of its genre and its story, it's not destined to make you really ponder, how the Milky Way was formed, which is fine. But I did find it almost humorous and kind of in keeping with the movie's very tongue-in-cheek kind of tone, that the end, when we're trying to figure out who's done it, who is the bad guy, who's the murderer or murderess in the room. And then all of a sudden, the guy pulls out the gun and he's like, that's him, that's it. Okay, wrap him up. All right, that's the end of the movie. And there's very little, it's fine. I think it serves the movie just fine. But after such a compelling and very well done, I think, lead up to, the mystery kind of unfurling, and this person's been murdered and now this person's been murdered and oh my gosh, who's buried over here? And then you're just left with, well, this guy did it. Why did he do it? Don't really know. Okay, the movie is over. And so it's only a criticism in the strictest form of that word, or maybe the loosest form, depending on how you look at it. Because I don't think it really affects the movie. I don't think it would have been better if that guy is given 5 minutes. Actually, it would have been quite a bit worse if he's like, well, this is why I did it, everybody. That's not really what this movie is about.
Yeah.
But I did find it very interesting. It's almost like the movie, the writer knows, okay, we have to finish this. But this is not really the most interesting part of the movie. So how can we get through it? And they get through it.
What do you think, Annie, if you had to just sum it up, what is this? A lot of it is about watching interesting characters do their thing. That's like, you wind them up and let them go. That's kind of like what this movie's for. But if you had to pick out story, themes, like what is it trying to say to the audience about anything big picture? Is it even trying?
Well, I think we've already touched on it. And I think it actually comes back to Justin's criticism, which kind of gets the point of, it's not about the crime. Nobody watches this movie, or I should say most people don't watch this movie in order to figure out who did it. They watch this movie for the relationship. They watch this movie for the depiction of marriage that we see, which is why it ends it's a comedy. It ends with a wedding. I mean, it's a little subtle because she's just carrying the bouquet, so you're just supposed to understand that this for some reason Nick and Nora are off with Dorothy on her honeymoon trip because that's normal. But I think the fact that it ends with a wedding and it ends with these two couples in love is proving that it's not actually about the mystery.
Now,
and
you've seen all of these. We haven't.
I have seen all 6.
Does it maintain that, or does it try to go more like almost procedural, mystery heavy?
So I think it continues that. And one theme that you see going through all the movies is, at least again, there's one that I've only watched once and I can't quite remember it very well, but
there's a reason.
There's a reason. In every case, Nick and Nora are not solving mysteries because of some desire for justice, and they're not doing it for the money, and they're not doing it for the fame. They're doing it for love. They're doing it because someone they love is in trouble and they want to save the person they love.
And this one, it almost feels like she eggs him on to even do it because she's like, I want to see you be a detective again.
Yeah. And it's honestly out of love. It's like, honey, and we have a lot of fun with the gin and the clubs and the BB guns, but like, this is what you're good at. And this is like, gives you reason for being. And I think she's pushing him because it's exciting, but I also think she's pushing him because she loves him. And she knows that this is what he's made for. And so when I look at the series as a whole, each one is driven through relationship. And so when you get to, okay, well, what are these movies really about? They're about that. They're about relationship and protecting the people you love and, yes, bringing truth and justice into the world, but that's not.
That's like a sub point.
They don't. I mean, do Nick and Nora really care about justice?
Yeah, I agree with everything that both of you said. I think as a movie, I think I've been surprised. I don't know. Just we had a couple moments here where it's been like, that was an oof couple of sequences, or even I keep going back to Frankenstein because I think it was my least favorite so far, even though I picked it. But like most of these have surprised me with how most people look at movies of this era, anything black and white, but certainly anything in the 30s that was just like post-silent films, and they would think like, I do not want to watch that. Like, why would I want to watch that? I'm not going to get it. It's going to be boring. I haven't seen that at all so far. I mean, I'm sure there's, weird, Euro art films, French films, things that like would be weird now, today, tomorrow, whatever. But this like kind of more mainstream stuff has a lot of the same appeal. Is that it? Are you finding that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not, because as we've talked, I think in previous episodes, people are the same. It doesn't matter how far back in history you go. The language is different, culture, technology, blah, blah, blah. That changes. The human condition doesn't. And so, yeah, I think Annie is spot on. This movie is all about, it's about love in an odd sense, matrimonial love at its core. Not something that usually sells tickets. I mean, I guess romantic comedies do, like How Do We Fall in Love? Yeah. But the story about the husband and wife that have been married and are still having a blast doing it, that's a harder sell, but not for this movie. Or
the next five. Yeah.
Or the next five, yeah. And maybe that's the dog's fault. I don't know. I want to go... I think that was probably my favorite side character. Yeah. He's a compelling. What was it? Asta? Is that his name?
Yeah.
If you do crossword puzzles, remember Asta.
Is that a common
yes,
clue?
It is a common clue.
Nice.
I'm not quite sure why, but it shows up all the time.
Of all the things that this movie did, I mean, brought Myrna Loy into the real spotlight. She'd been kind of a background actor and in some certainly not starring roles up until this point. I'm just looking at this like as a blueprint for how things will go in the future. And I don't want to like apply so much authority to this analysis. I'm just saying this movie had 5 direct sequels, all with the same actors as Nick and Nora, which is, I was telling off mic, I was talking to Annie, and that's more than Bogey and Bacall made. And they weren't even the same character. I mean, they weren't called the same characters in every movie. They kind of played super similar characters. There's a lot of just like blueprint for murder mystery comedy stuff in here that certainly Dashiell Hammett deserves a lot of credit for, but in a cinematic way, like, do you even have something like Clue the board game or Clue the movie without the dinner scene from this movie? I'm not I'm not sure. There was a TV series from 1957 to 59. Same characters played by Peter Lawford and Phyllis Kirk. Have you watched that?
I didn't even know about it.
Yeah, it's something. I don't know. There's a 76 movie called Murder by Death, which is this like comedy mystery. I think it has 1 billion people in it, but David Niven and Maggie Smith
That makes sense.
play Nick and Nora in that. I don't know how big of a part it is, but there's just like it just goes and goes and goes. This is, I don't want to be so ridiculous in my comparisons, but we always talk about the Marvelification of like things. Like when it could be Star Wars, it could be anything. Like when you look at the yearly release, they did them about every 3 years, these ones, these Nick and Nora movies, but like this is one of the first like super replicable franchises. I'm looking at like Bond, and thinking like, do we have a literary, are all the movies books?
I don't know.
Okay.
I kind of doubt it.
Okay.
But I don't know.
Because that's,
I think Mr. Dashiell's last novel was The Thin Man. I don't think he wrote anything after that because World War II and communism and McCarthyism.
Oh, yeah, because he and Lillian Hellman got in some trouble with the House Un-American Activities Committee.
He was thrown in prison for a while.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so then it is see, I'm right, because Ian Fleming wrote a bunch of the Bond books that turned into movies, but we have tons of Bond movies at this point that are just, this is Bond in a movie. Now they've taken the character and just pushed it forward. And, they're both drunk. They're both trying to figure things out.
They're both very suave.
The difference is one of them is very loyal to his wife and the other one doesn't know what that means. A woman is a piece of meat or whatever.
Yeah.
So I just think it's interesting. You look at the potential ripple effect of something like this, and this is 100 years ago almost at this point, and we're still seeing things built upon that. Before we get to our final concise review and our is it worth our time, I'm just going to go around the figurative table one more time. Justin, is there anything else you want to add about The Thin Man that you didn't get in?
Yeah, just with regard to the bigger question, what's it saying? Although this isn't the main point, I do think it might be worth noting that it reinforces the American myth that one American man usually can solve kind of whatever problems, and he or she, in this case, he doesn't need any help doing it. Even if you contrast it, they're not quite the same, and I get that, like the Pink Panther series, right, which is very farcical. And Peter Sellers is playing not even a British cop; he's playing a French one,
sort of.
But just right in name at least. And so it's very much not the point about like will he bring to justice? Will that happen? And sometimes it does not.
Yeah.
In the first one, he's the one that's thrown into prison. So it's very absurd, but I think it does show the difference between how Americans view themselves. And especially in that era, I think Europeans are more willing to kind of laugh at themselves and admit we have some real limitations as humans, and sometimes we don't do the right thing and we don't figure it out. And you contrast that with the sheer arrogance, although it's lovable sometimes, of Mr. Nick Charles. He just because he's the smartest guy in the room, he kind of does whatever, and without really anybody's help, he does everything that needs to be done in this movie. And I think that feeds directly into how Americans like to see themselves.
I totally agree that that's how Americans see themselves. That's an absolute truth. However, I take Nick Charles back to Sherlock. I call Nick Charles Sherlock with some manners and some suaveness.
And extra booze.
Booze instead of cocaine.
Yes,
but
opium.
Yeah. But I think there's a theory out there that every detective is just Sherlock in some other form, and so I hear what you're saying about Peter Sellers and the European view, but I do think that the arrogant detective who's smarter than everyone in the room, I actually take back to the Brits.
That's fair. I stand corrected, and I would concede that point to you for sure. Maybe only noting that while Sherlock is very arrogant and always right, he's also insane. I mean, he's unlike Mr. Charles. He's not this likable, suave life of the party. Here, let me show you how to mix that drink. You know, some people try to read in a homoerotic, you know, telling to Sherlock. Whether or not that's there, he's just not. He's. I guess my point is that it seems to me they're presented very differently.
Yes.
They're both arrogant. They're both right about everything. But Nick Charles is the guy you probably would more want to be at a party.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, let's get into the last section, which we so fondly call, Is It Worth Your Time? Well, because it's probably no surprise if you've listened to the first few minutes of this podcast, I'm going to start with Annie and ask her the question we're all on the edge of our seats for. Is it worth your time? And in here we try to answer the question, how often would we rewatch this?
Yes, I think I've already answered this one. As a kid, I watched it multiple times a year. I think I rewatched it in order to talk about it tonight. I probably hadn't watched it in quite a few years. Mostly because I pretty much have it memorized and I just run it in my head. I don't need to watch it. So, you know, I think that once a year would probably be my max or be my normal. But
you're a fan.
I think I am a fan, and I think that most of the series is eminently rewatchable and fun no matter how many times you've seen it.
Okay, that's awesome. I think you know, at the time of recording this, we're just literally just in the new year of 2021. This is just post Christmas time, and this is a Christmas adjacent movie, like many are. It's not a Christmas movie, but it kind of takes place around Christmas time, and he shoots some balloons off a tree. So I really enjoyed this. I could definitely see myself going on and watching the sequels. It you know, the comparisons that came up are all very apt. If you like a little bit of procedure from Sherlock, detective work, if you like the slapstickiness of Peter Sellers in The Pink Panther, and if you like the idea of, you know, the core of your story being two married people who really like genuinely love each other and push each other forward in the story without any unnecessary melodrama or lack of trust or whatever, that's all very unique to this story. You know, like that combination of things is unique. Sherlock doesn't have a Nora, and for that reason, the likability is off the charts. Every time I watched the next scene, I was hoping that someone wasn't going to be dead from alcohol poisoning, but but I enjoyed it very much. I could see myself, before I rewatch this, you know, watching the rest of them because I just want to see more of it. But I could make this a New Year's Eve-ish tradition. It feels like that seems kind of right. It's not super Christmassy, but once a year seems about right for me. Justin, what about you?
Yeah, I would say once a year, and, you know, frankly, maybe even a little more, because it's just an easy view. You know, here comes Schindler's List again.
Yep.
Right, Travis?
We always bring up Schindler's List.
It's just it's a painful movie to watch. It's like reading Weisel's Night. You know, it's just not. It's not something you really want to subject yourself to, even if you feel some kind of burden. Like, as a human, acknowledging the world we live in, I feel like I should watch this. This movie is far and away not that. It's so fun to watch, and so I feel like I could. You know what? I'm gonna up the ante on both of yous and say I could do it twice a year.
Oh my gosh!
Okay, watch out. Once at Christmas time or thereafter. Yes. Okay, and once in the heat of the summer. A glass of lemonade in one hand, my little terrier by my
Just
side.
Lemonade?
Yeah. What?
A little gin in your lemonade,
well,
too.
Hard. That's what they called it back then.
All lemonade.
Pass me some more of that lemonade.
Yeah, 80
so
proof.
I would watch it's and you know, despite all the kind of there's a fair amount of innuendos, they're so highbrow and so well done and earned. I feel like this also makes a fine family film. And so whether or not the kids all get it, what's going on. I mean, Annie just said you first started watching this when you were 7 or 8, right? It does seem like a fun movie for people of all ages.
You don't seem screwed up too awfully bad from it.
Oh, well, you know, not from this. Yeah, and I will say, as a kid, you know, a huge amount of it just went over my head. And my parents would always make jokes about how much apple juice he was drinking. And I understood that it was alcohol, but a lot of it went right over my head.
Wonderful. Just the way we like it. Well, I super enjoyed this conversation. You too. I loved the Thin Man. We're halfway done, Justin. How do you feel about being halfway done?
Oh my goodness. I thought it would never come, Travis.
The halfway
No,
point.
having a good time. Having a good time. What's on the agenda next week?
Oh, it's only a little known director named Alfred Hitchcock for the 39 Steps.
Hitch who?
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, no, it should be fun.
It should be fun.
Looking forward
I think
to
we're going from a pair and it happened one night to a pair in the Thin Man to another pair in the 39 Steps. So it should be interesting. We hope you'll join us and keep listening. Bye.
Let the movie speak.
Who is she?
Oh, darling, I was hoping I wouldn't have to answer that.
Come on.
Well, Dorothy is really my daughter. You see, it was spring in Venice, and I was so young I didn't know what I was doing. We're all like that on my father's side.
By the way, how is your father's side?
Oh, it's much better, thanks. And yours?
Say, how many drinks have you had?
This will make 6 martinis.
All right. Will you bring me 5 more martinis? Leo, line them right up here.
Yes, ma'am.
Hey, since you're still here and still listening, thank you, by the way, we'd like to ask an additional favor of you.
We have social media. It's a thing on the internet. And all you need to do is find us on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook and like and subscribe. I know this is annoying, but we have to ask you because we want more people to hear the show. In addition to that, if you could rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, we would greatly appreciate it. See you next week. Bye.